I'd always considered myself pretty self-sufficient. After graduating college, I managed to snag a small 2-bedroom house just outside of town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older folks who kept to themselves, and the biggest excitement usually involved Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias. My days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Up at 6, a quick jog, then off to my job as a paralegal in the city. Evenings were spent cooking a simple meal, reading, or catching up on a show. It was November now, and the colder evenings meant I was usually tucked inside by sundown, the soft glow of my living room lamp a comforting beacon against the encroaching darkness. I'd installed a motion sensor porch light a few months back, just a small LED fixture, more for convenience when fumbling for my keys than for any real sense of security. It rarely came on unless I was leaving or arriving. The first oddity was subtle, easily dismissed. One Tuesday evening, I was engrossed in a legal brief, the only sounds the hum of my refrigerator and the gentle patter of rain against the window. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a brief flicker of light from outside. My porch light. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 10 p.m. Must be a cat, I thought, or a particularly large raccoon. I didn't get up. The light went off almost immediately, as quickly as it had come on. I shrugged and returned to my brief, the incident already fading from memory. It happened again 2 nights later, a Thursday. This time, I was making myself a cup of tea, standing by the kitchen window which offered a partial view of the front porch. The light flashed on, then off. Nothing. No movement, no shadow. Wind, I murmured to the empty room, a logical explanation for an inconsequential event. The house was old, the electrical wiring probably a bit finicky. I decided to ignore it. The following week, the flickers became more frequent and more unsettling. It wasn't just a quick flash anymore. Now, the light would stay on for a full minute, sometimes 2, before shutting off. I started to check the window, peering through the blinds each time it happened. Nothing. No person, no animal, no car passing. Just the empty porch, illuminated for a brief, inexplicable period. One evening, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard the faint click of the light coming on. I pulled myself up, groggy, and crept to my bedroom window, which overlooked the front of the house. The porch was bathed in its stark, white glow. Still nothing. But then, as I watched, transfixed, a shadow detached itself from the side of my house, near the rose bushes, and moved towards the porch. It was low to the ground, almost crawling. My heart gave a violent thump against my ribs. I couldn't make out details, but it was too large for a cat, too deliberate for an animal. Before I could process what I was seeing, the shadow retreated back into the deeper darkness beside the house, and the porch light clicked off, plunging everything back into oppressive blackness. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded like an approaching footstep. The next day I was a wreck. I called my dad, trying to sound casual, asking if motion sensors could malfunction in the cold. He suggested I check the sensitivity settings, maybe clean the sensor eye. That evening, before it got dark, I went out onto the porch. The air was crisp, hinting at winter. I squinted at the small sensor on the light fixture. It seemed clear. As I stood there, a peculiar feeling crept over me, the distinct sensation of being watched. I scanned my yard, then the neighbors' yards, but saw nothing amiss. The quiet was almost suffocating. Suddenly, my eyes landed on something that made my breath catch in my throat. Embedded in the damp soil of the small flower bed directly beneath the porch light, just at the edge of the concrete steps, was a single muddy footprint. It was distinct, clear, and far too large to be mine. It was also facing towards my front door. My stomach lurched. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't the wind. I rushed inside, locking the deadbolt with a frantic click, then adding the chain lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called a locksmith, explaining that I needed new, stronger locks tonight. While I waited, I moved from room to room, pulling down all the blinds, double-checking every window latch. The house, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile shell, transparent to unseen eyes. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a form, every creak sounded like an intruder. When the locksmith finally arrived, a kind, older man with calloused hands, he noticed my pallor. "Everything all right, miss?" he asked gently. I just shook my head, unable to articulate the cold dread that had settled in my chest. He installed new high-security deadbolts on both my front and back doors, reinforcing the frames. As he was leaving, he paused at the porch. "Seems like your motion light is on a hair trigger," he observed, looking up at the fixture. It just came on. I hadn't heard the click this time, lost in my own fear. I looked. The light was indeed on, bathing the empty porch in its cold glow. "It does that a lot," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze, my eyes darting towards the rose bushes, remembering the crawling shadow. The locksmith just nodded, unaware of the horror I felt. He adjusted something on the light and it went off. "Should be less sensitive now," he said. After he left, I double-locked everything again and spent the night huddled on my sofa, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand, staring at the darkened front door. I never saw the porch light flicker again after that night. I even replaced the motion sensor with a simple switch-operated light. But every time I come home in the dark, every time I hear a rustle outside, I still glance nervously at that flower bed, half expecting to see another footprint. The memory of that crawling shadow and the distinct impression in the dirt has etched itself into my mind, a chilling reminder that sometimes the things that go bump in the night aren't just animals or faulty wiring, but something far more deliberate, far more sinister. I was a long-haul truck driver for nearly 5 years, and I'd seen my fair share of strange occurrences on the road. From desolate stretches of highway where mirages played tricks on your eyes, to bizarre roadside attractions that felt plucked from a nightmare, I thought I was pretty unshakable. My route usually took me across the Midwest, hauling everything from car parts to frozen goods. November was always a tough month, unpredictable weather, early sunsets, and the general feeling of isolation intensified by the stark, skeletal trees that lined the interstates. This particular run was a straightforward delivery from Chicago to Denver, a 3-day journey if I pushed it. I'd stocked up on coffee, podcasts, and my favorite beef jerky. The hum of the engine was a familiar lullaby, the endless ribbon of asphalt my companion. The first hint of something being wrong came on the second night. I was somewhere in Nebraska, miles from the nearest town, the highway stretching out under a sky thick with stars. I just pulled off at a rest stop, one of those dimly lit, desolate places with a single flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom and an overwhelming smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. I did my usual checks: tires, fuel, cargo straps. As I walked around the cab, I distinctly heard a faint, rhythmic creak coming from the passenger side. It sounded like the suspension or perhaps a loose panel. I knelt down, trying to pinpoint the source, but the moment I stopped moving, the sound vanished. I shrugged it off. Old truck, old sounds. It was probably just the metal cooling down after hours of driving. I climbed back into the cab, fired up the engine, and continued on my way, the incident already forgotten. The creaking returned a few hours later, more persistent this time. I was deep into a stretch of road where the only other vehicles were distant pinpricks of light. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like someone gently rocking back and forth. Creak, creak, creak. It seemed to be coming from inside the cab, specifically from the passenger seat. I glanced over. The seat was empty, of course, piled with my jacket and a map. I reached over, pressing down on the cushion, feeling for anything out of place. Nothing. The sound continued, steady and unnerving. I tried to reason it away. Maybe the spring in the seat was loose. Maybe it was the suspension and the sound was just echoing strangely. I turned up the volume on my podcast, trying to drown it out, but the creak seemed to cut through the noise, a persistent, unsettling rhythm. I found myself periodically glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting to see some faint impression of weight, but it remained flat and untouched. My skin crawled. By the early hours of the morning, the situation escalated from an annoyance to genuine terror. The creaking stopped, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the cab's interior temperature. It felt colder, distinctly colder, only on the passenger side. I could feel a strange draft despite all the windows being sealed tight. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, a metallic tang like old blood mixed with something sickly sweet, almost like decaying flowers. It made the hair on my arms stand on end. I rolled down my window for a moment, letting the cold night air rush in, hoping to clear my head, but when I rolled it back up, the scent lingered, stronger now. My eyes kept darting to the passenger seat. The outline of my jacket on it seemed to have subtly changed, as if a slight indentation had formed beneath it. I slammed my hand down on the seat, trying to flatten the cushion, but the sensation of a cold spot persisted, and the metallic odor seemed to intensify, filling my nostrils. I felt an undeniable presence beside me, a chilling weight in the empty seat. My heart was hammering. I flicked on the interior light. Nothing. Just the empty seat. But the cold, the smell, the feeling, it was overwhelming. I felt a desperate need to pull over to get out of the truck, but the thought of being alone on that desolate highway with whatever was in my cab was even more terrifying. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my eyes darting between the road and the passenger seat. The metallic smell became almost unbearable, and I could swear I heard a faint, shallow breathing coming from just beside my ear, like a very sick person. It was too soft to be definitive, too insidious to ignore. I started talking to myself, loud and frantic, trying to fill the oppressive silence. "Just a long drive, Dave. I muttered. "You're tired?" "It's nothing." But even as I spoke, the cold spot on the seat seemed to deepen, and the jacket on it looked undeniably compressed, as if someone heavy was sitting there, shrouded by the fabric. Panic began to set in. I was no longer just driving, I was desperately trying to outrun something that was already inside the vehicle with me. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the old rig to its limits. I needed light, people, anything to break this suffocating isolation. Up ahead, I saw the shimmering lights of a small town, a gas station, a diner. It was still miles away, but it was a beacon. I focused on it, imagining the fluorescent glow, the chatter of voices, the smell of coffee. The breathing beside me seemed to quicken, a dry, ragged gasp. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to open the passenger door and shove whatever was there out, but a primal fear kept my hand frozen on the wheel. What if I saw something? What if it didn't leave? I finally pulled into the brightly lit gas station, tires squealing as I brought the truck to an abrupt stop next to a pump. I didn't even bother with the engine. I flung open my door and practically tumbled out, gasping for air, the metallic smell still clinging to my clothes. I ran around to the passenger side, my heart pounding like a drum, and yanked the door open. The seat was empty. My jacket lay there just as I had left it. There was no visible indentation, no lingering scent, no cold spot. The ordinary light of the gas station seemed to banish the horrors of the road. I stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, trying to convince myself it had all been my imagination, a consequence of exhaustion and too much coffee. But as I refueled and then sat inside the brightly lit diner nursing a lukewarm coffee, I couldn't shake the memory of that cold, silent presence. I completed my delivery, but the entire return trip felt different. Every bump in the road, every unfamiliar sound made me jump. I found myself constantly checking the passenger seat, even in broad daylight. I eventually switched to a shorter, local route, unable to stomach the long, lonely stretches of highway anymore. Sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I still feel a phantom chill on my right side, and I swear I catch a faint whiff of that metallic, sickly sweet scent. The highway holds its secrets, and some of them, I learned, prefer to ride shotgun. My first apartment after college was a ground floor unit in an old Victorian house that had been converted into 3 separate living spaces. It had character, as the landlord put it, high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a charming, if slightly overgrown, garden in the back. The only drawback was that my bedroom window, which faced the side of the house, looked directly out onto a set of old, rusted window wells for the basement. The basement itself was strictly off-limits to tenants. It was where the landlord stored his tools and various forgotten antiques. It was November, and the encroaching cold made the old house creak and groan, sounds I'd grown accustomed to. My routine was simple: work during the day at a small marketing firm, then back to my cozy apartment for an evening of Netflix and cooking. I felt safe there, nestled in my little corner of the old house. The first strange occurrence was so minor I almost didn't register it. I was getting ready for bed one chilly Tuesday night, brushing my teeth, when I heard a soft, scraping sound. It seemed to be coming from outside my bedroom window, which was directly above one of the basement window wells. I paused, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, listening intently. The sound was faint, a gentle skk, like something lightly dragging across stone. I peered out the window, but it was dark, and the angle made it impossible to see into the window well. Probably just a branch scratching against the house in the wind, I thought, shrugging. The trees outside were old and their branches thick. I finished up and went to bed, dismissing the sound as nothing more than the normal creaks and groans of an old house settling for the night. The scraping returned a few nights later, but this time it was more distinct, and accompanied by a new sound, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching like fingernails on glass. I was lying in bed trying to read when I heard it again. Skk. Scratch, scratch. It was definitely coming from the direction of the basement window well. My heart gave a tiny flutter. It sounded too deliberate to be a tree branch. I imagined a squirrel or a raccoon, but the scratching on glass seemed odd for an animal. I got out of bed and crept to the window, pulling aside the curtain a fraction. It was too dark to see anything clearly, but the sounds persisted, a low, rhythmic pattern that sent a shiver down my spine. I stood there for a few minutes, straining my ears, until finally, after a particularly loud skk, the sounds abruptly stopped. I waited in silence, my breath held, but they didn't resume. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a loose piece of siding or an animal that had finally moved on. Still, the image of something scratching at a basement window in the dead of night made me uneasy. The unsettling incidents escalated over the next few days, chipping away at my sense of security. The scratching and scraping became louder, more insistent, often accompanied by faint thumping sounds, as if something was bumping against the outside wall of the basement. One evening, I was in my living room watching TV when I heard it clearly, a muffled thump 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 followed by the familiar skk. It was definitely originating from the basement, directly beneath my bedroom. I felt a prickle of fear. This was more than an animal or a tree branch. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Had the landlord left something running down there? Was there a burst pipe? I grabbed my phone, contemplating calling him, but then hesitated. What would I say? Something's making noise in your basement window well? He'd probably think I was crazy. Instead, I decided to be brave. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached my bedroom window. My heart was pounding. I pulled back the curtain, shining the beam down into the dark abyss of the window well. The beam cut through the black, illuminating the dusty, grimy basement window pane. My breath hitched. Streaks. Clear, distinct streaks, as if something had been dragged downwards across the glass. They were too thin to be from a branch, too precise for an animal. And then, at the very bottom of the window well, barely visible in the corner of the beam's reach, I saw it. A small, dark object. It looked like a child's toy, a small, worn-out doll, face down in the dirt, its single visible eye button staring blankly into the darkness. I dropped the curtain as if burned, the flashlight clattering to the floor. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The doll? In the landlord's off-limits basement window well? The streaks on the glass, the scraping, the thumping, a cold dread settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just some random noise. This was deliberate. I backed away from the window, my eyes darting nervously around my room. Had someone been down there? Was someone still down there? The idea was horrifying. I snatched up my phone and called my best friend, Sarah, my voice trembling as I recounted everything. She urged me to call the police or at least the landlord immediately, but I hesitated, still feeling foolish. What if it was just the landlord's kid's old toy and he'd left it there? What if I was overreacting? But the image of those streaks, so clearly made by something trying to get in or get out, kept replaying in my mind. I decided against calling anyone, but I spent the rest of the night huddled in my living room, the lights on, a heavy chair pushed against my bedroom door. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, the first thing I did was check the window. The doll was gone. The streaks on the glass were still faintly visible, but they seemed less terrifying in the harsh light of day. I tried to convince myself that the landlord had simply cleared out some junk, but a gnawing suspicion remained. That afternoon, I saw the landlord in the driveway. He was a gruff, elderly man who rarely interacted with tenants. I approached him, trying to sound casual. "Hey, I heard some noises from the basement window well last night." I began, my voice a little too high. Sounded like something scratching at the glass. "You know anything about that?" He looked at me, a blank expression on his face. "Basement sealed up tight," he grunted. "Nobody goes down there but me, and I haven't been in a week." He squinted at me. "You didn't see anything, did you?" "No," I lied quickly, remembering the doll. "Just sounds?" He shrugged. "Probably just raccoons. They get into everything." But his words offered no comfort. Raccoons don't leave streaks like that, and raccoons don't play with dolls. I considered moving out right then and there, but I was locked into a lease, and finding another place in November was next to impossible. For the next few weeks, I slept with all the lights on and a chair propped against my bedroom door. I started taking long detours around the side of the house, avoiding the basement windows. I never heard the scratching again, nor did I see any more mysterious objects. But the memory of that doll, and the distinct feeling of something trying to get out or get in from the darkness of that basement window well, stays with me. Even now, in new apartments, I avoid ground floor units, and I always check what's outside my window, especially when November rolls around and the nights grow long. Working the overnight shift at a deserted motel on the outskirts of town was usually mind-numbingly boring. My job mostly involved checking in the occasional late-night traveler, handling the phone, and making sure the coffee was brewed for the morning rush. It was a November job, meaning it was cold, quiet, and most nights the only company I had was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant growl of semi-trucks on the highway. I'd been at the Sleepy Hollow Inn for about 8 months now, and I knew every creak, every draft, every sound this aging establishment made. My routine was set, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I'd bring a book, my headphones, and a thermos of strong tea. The front desk was a small, enclosed area, surrounded by thick glass, offering a view of the dimly lit lobby and the automatic sliding doors. The only entrance to my little sanctuary was a locked door at the back, leading to a small break room and the staff restrooms. The first oddity was so subtle, I almost dismissed it as a glitch in the old phone system. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a particularly dreary Tuesday. The rain was coming down in sheets outside, drumming a monotonous rhythm on the roof. The phone at the front desk, an ancient beige rotary model, rang. It was an internal call indicated by the single, short ring. I picked it up. Sleepy Hollow Inn, front desk, this is Mike. Silence. Not a dial tone, not static, just absolute, profound silence. I waited, holding the receiver to my ear. Hello? Can I help you? I asked again, a hint of impatience in my voice. Still nothing. After about 10 seconds, I shrugged and hung up. Must have been someone accidentally dialing the wrong extension, I thought. It happened occasionally, usually a sleepy guest trying to reach room service, which we didn't have. I didn't give it another thought. 2 nights later, the phone rang again at roughly the same time, around 2:45 a.m. Again, a single, short internal ring. I picked it up, a slight sense of déjà vu. Sleepy Hollow Inn, Mike speaking. Again, the silence. This time, it felt heavier, more deliberate. I could almost feel the empty space on the other end of the line. I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear, listening for any faint sound, any breath, but there was nothing. Is anyone there? I asked, my voice a little softer now, a touch of unease creeping in. Still silence. A full 30 seconds passed. I was about to hang up when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible click, as if the caller had just hung up their end. I lowered the receiver, my brow furrowed. That was strange. Too silent, too precise. I glanced at the monitor displaying the motel's floor plan, showing which rooms were occupied. Most of the rooms were dark, only a handful of guests checked in. I mentally scrolled through the room numbers, wondering which one it could be. None of it added up. The calls became a nightly occurrence, a chilling ritual that slowly unraveled my composure. Every night, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., the phone would ring. Always a single, internal ring. Always silence on the other end. Always that distinct, faint click when the unknown caller finally hung up. It wasn't accidental anymore. It was deliberate. I started to dread that hour, my eyes constantly darting to the phone, waiting for it to jolt me from the monotony. I tried pressing 69 once, hoping to retrieve the last number called, but the old system just gave me a busy signal. My sleep became restless, haunted by the thought of who or what was calling me from within the empty motel. I even started walking around the lobby and the hallways during my shift, peering into the shadows, half expecting to see some figure lurking. But there was never anything. Just the quiet hum of the building and the oppressive silence after each call. The worst part was the feeling of being watched, the growing certainty that the caller knew I was there, waiting, listening. One particular night, the fear escalated into outright terror. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I picked it up, my hand shaking slightly. Sleepy Hollow Inn, Mike. This time, there was no immediate silence. Instead, a faint, ragged breathing emanated from the receiver. It was shallow, wheezing, like someone struggling for air or trying to suppress a sob. My blood ran cold. It wasn't human breathing. It was too uneven, too desperate. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. Then, compelled by a morbid curiosity, I brought it back. The breathing continued, and then, faintly, almost impossibly, I heard a sound that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. A slow, deliberate drip. Drip, drip, as if water was falling onto a hard surface. And then a whisper. So low, so guttural that I barely registered it as words. It sounded like, "I'm coming for you." And then the click. The line went dead. I dropped the receiver. It clattered against the desk, sending a harsh echo through the silent lobby. My heart was pounding so violently I thought it would burst through my chest. The words, the breathing, the dripping, it wasn't a prank call. It was a threat. And it was coming from inside the motel. I scrambled backwards, bumping against the chair, my eyes wide and frantic. I stared at the main lobby door, then at the entrance to my little office area. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the emergency alarm button beneath the counter, but I hesitated. What would I tell the police? That a ghostly caller whispered threats? They'd think I was crazy. Instead, I decided to lock myself in. I double-checked the reinforced door to my back office, then moved a heavy filing cabinet against it just in case. I turned off all the lobby lights, plunging the room into near darkness, hoping that if whatever was out there saw no one, it would leave. I huddled behind the counter, my cell phone clutched in my hand, ready to dial 911 at the slightest sound. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps approaching. I spent the rest of my shift in a state of terrified paralysis, listening to the rain continue its relentless drumming outside, and straining my ears for any sound from within the silent motel. When the morning sun finally began to filter through the windows, chasing away the shadows, I practically sprinted out the door without even bothering to log out. I called my boss immediately, telling him I quit. I fabricated some excuse about a family emergency. He sounded annoyed but didn't argue. I never went back to the Sleepy Hollow Inn. I drive past it sometimes, a dark, abandoned-looking shell on the highway, and a cold shiver runs down my spine. The memory of that wheezing breath, the dripping sound, and the guttural whisper still echoes in my mind. I often wonder who or what was calling me from those empty motel rooms, and what would have happened if I hadn't hung up that final night. The silence on the other end of a phone can be far more terrifying than any scream. My grandmother's house had always been a place of comfort for me. After she passed, leaving it to me, I decided to move in, partly to save money on rent and partly to feel closer to her. It was a charming, albeit slightly dilapidated, two-story house built in the 1930s, nestled on a tree-lined street in a quiet, established neighborhood. The attic, however, was something of a mystery. Grandma had always kept it locked, claiming it was just full of her old tax records and some dusty furniture she meant to sell. It had a pull-down ladder access from the upstairs hallway, and I rarely gave it a second thought. It was November, and the dry leaves skittered across the porch, making it sound like someone was constantly shuffling their feet outside. I was enjoying the peace and quiet, rediscovering old family photos, and generally settling into my new life. The first unusual sound from the attic was so faint, I almost convinced myself it was just the house settling. I was in my bedroom, directly beneath the attic access, reading late one evening. The house was utterly silent, save for the gentle hum of my bedside lamp. Then I heard it, a soft, rustling sound like dry leaves being disturbed, coming from directly above me. Must be a squirrel, I thought. The old house had a few gaps in the eaves, and I wouldn't have been surprised if a small animal had found its way in. I listened for a moment, but the sound quickly faded. I shrugged, marking it down to the quirks of living in an older home, and returned to my book. The rustling returned a few nights later, more distinct this time, and accompanied by a new sound, a subtle, almost imperceptible creak. I was in the kitchen making myself a late-night snack when I heard it. Rustle, rustle, creak. It was definitely coming from the attic, and it sounded heavier than a squirrel. My heart gave a little jump. Could it be a raccoon? I went to the hallway and looked up at the attic access panel. It was a simple plywood square with a small metal ring for pulling down the ladder. It looked secure. I stood there, straining my ears until the sound stopped. I felt a prickle of unease. A raccoon was one thing, but the creaking sound suggested something larger, something that might put weight on the attic floorboards. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was probably just the old wood expanding and contracting in the cold. But the image of an unknown creature lurking in my grandmother's attic was unsettling. Over the next week, the sounds from the attic became more frequent and more disturbing. The rustling grew louder, more erratic, and the creaks were undeniably the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floorboards directly above my bedroom. It wasn't just in one spot, it was moving. My imagination began to run wild. Was it a larger animal? A possum? A stray cat? But the rhythm of the footsteps felt too heavy, too human. One evening, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard it again. Creak, creak, rustle, creak. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor, then shuffling their feet. Then a new sound, one that sent a jolt of pure fear through me. A faint, almost melodic clink like metal striking glass, followed by a muffled thud. I shot upright in bed, my heart hammering. This wasn't an animal. Animals don't make clinking sounds. This was something else entirely. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling, debating whether to call the police. But what would I say? There are noises in my attic? They'd think I was crazy. The fear reached its peak the following night. I was trying to ignore the constant sounds, huddled under my blankets, when I heard a distinct scraping sound directly above my bed, followed by a soft, hesitant tap, 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 against the ceiling. It was as if someone was gently testing the plaster. My breath caught in my throat. This was too close, too deliberate. I could almost feel a presence pressing down on me from above. Then the rhythmic tapping stopped and was replaced by a low, guttural murmur, a sound so faint and indistinct that it could have been the wind or my own panicked mind playing tricks. But it sounded like a voice. A deep, rasping voice, just barely audible through the ceiling. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed, straining to hear. The murmur stopped, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of something being dragged across the attic floor, directly towards the access panel in the hallway. My blood ran cold. Whatever was up there was moving towards the only way out, the only way down. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it wasn't an animal. It was something else. something that shouldn't be there, something that was aware of me. I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing, and stumbled into the hallway. My eyes were fixed on the attic access panel. It looked normal, a flat square of plywood, but I could hear the sounds now directly above it. The faint creak of heavy footsteps, and then a soft, barely audible thump against the panel itself, as if something had just nudged it from above. I didn't wait. Panic surged through me, overpowering any attempt at rational thought. I ran out of the house, not even bothering to grab my keys or my coat, barefoot and in my pajamas, sprinting down the street to my neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they answered, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. I blurted out a garbled explanation, my voice trembling, my mind still reeling from the sound of that voice and the thumping against the panel. My neighbors, a kind elderly couple, listened patiently, then called the police. 2 officers arrived a few minutes later, looking skeptical but professional. They cautiously entered my house and I stayed outside, shivering in the cold, watching them. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came back out. "Nothing, ma'am," he said, shaking his head. "Attic's empty. Looks like an old storage space. No signs of forced entry, no animals." He even showed me a quick photo from his phone. A dusty, cobweb-filled attic, full of old trunks and boxes. No sign of anything out of place. No doll. No drag marks. No sign that anyone or anything had been there. I tried to argue, to explain the sounds, the voice, the tapping, but his polite, dismissive gaze made me feel foolish. He suggested perhaps I was stressed, maybe the house was just old. I thanked them, numb with confusion and lingering terror. I never went back into that house alone. I packed my most essential belongings while my neighbors stayed with me, then found a new apartment the very next day. I sold the house as quickly as I could, never setting foot in the attic again, never even looking up at the access panel. To this day, the memory of those footsteps and that faint, guttural whisper makes my skin crawl. I still don't know what was in my grandmother's attic or what it wanted, but the thought of it being there, directly above me, listening, is a fear that will never truly leave me. My uncle owned a small, rustic cabin nestled deep within the state forest, a few hours' drive from civilization. It was an old hunting cabin, sparsely furnished but warm, a perfect escape from the city. Every November, I'd make the trek out there, spending a week or so completely off-grid, enjoying the crisp air, the silence, and the simple beauty of the wilderness. This particular year, I'd arrived a few days before Thanksgiving, intending to chop some firewood, read, and just generally decompress. The cabin sat at the edge of a clearing, with dense woods rising up immediately behind it, a wall of bare, skeletal trees that stretched for miles. I loved the solitude, the feeling of being utterly alone in nature. The first hint that my peaceful retreat might be disturbed came on the 3rd day. I was out chopping firewood near the edge of the clearing, the rhythmic thud of the axe echoing through the still air. I paused to wipe sweat from my brow, enjoying the silence that followed. And then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible rustle from deep within the woods behind the cabin. It wasn't the sound of wind, which would have been a continuous sigh. This was a distinct, short burst of movement, like something large moving quickly through the undergrowth, then stopping. I froze, listening intently. Nothing. Just the wind sifting through the dry leaves overhead. Must be a deer, I thought, a logical explanation for an isolated sound in the wilderness. I resumed my chopping, dismissing the sound as a natural part of the forest. The rustling returned later that evening, far more unsettling this time. I was inside the cabin, reading by the warm glow of the kerosene lamp, the only sound the crackle of the fire in the hearth. The windows were small, thick-paned, and old. Suddenly, a distinct thump came from the woods directly behind the cabin, followed by a series of hurried rustles, as if something heavy was running through the undergrowth. My head snapped up. That was too loud for a deer. Bears were usually hibernating by November. My heart started to beat a little faster. I got up and went to the back window, peering out into the inky blackness. I couldn't see anything beyond the immediate reach of the cabin's porch light, which barely illuminated the first few trees. The sounds had stopped as abruptly as they began. I stood there for a long moment, straining my ears, but heard nothing more. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just an animal, perhaps a large wild boar. Still, the hurried nature of the sounds, the definite thump, left me feeling unnerved. I double-checked the locks on the cabin door and tried to return to my book, but my focus was broken. Over the next few days, the sounds from the woods intensified, becoming more frequent and more disturbing. It wasn't just rustling anymore. Now, there were distinct snapping sounds, like twigs being deliberately broken, and sometimes a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo through the trees. It always came from the woods directly behind the cabin and always after dusk. One evening, I was cooking dinner, the smell of venison stew filling the small cabin. When I heard it, a long drawn-out scrape against the side of the cabin wall, directly behind the kitchen. It sounded like something large and rough dragging itself along the wooden planks. My blood ran cold. I dropped the ladle with a clatter. This wasn't an animal anymore. This was too deliberate, too close. I grabbed the old hunting rifle my uncle kept above the fireplace, my hands shaking, and slowly, cautiously approached the back door. I peered out the small window beside it, my breath held. Nothing. Just the oppressive darkness of the woods, now seeming to press in on the cabin. But I could feel something out there, a malevolent presence lurking just beyond the reach of my sight. The real terror began late one night when I was trying to sleep. The sounds had been constant for hours, growls, snapping branches, and the chilling sound of something heavy pacing back and forth just outside the cabin's back wall. I was huddled under my blankets, the rifle clutched tightly in my hands, when I heard it, a soft, persistent tap, 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 coming from the small high window above my bed. It was too precise, too rhythmic to be a branch. It sounded like a knuckle gently tapping on the glass. My breath hitched in my throat. Then a low, almost human-like groan, right outside the window, followed by a muffled thud against the wall, as if something was leaning against the cabin. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced that whatever was out there was now directly at my window watching me. I felt an inexplicable urge to look, to confirm my worst fears, but a deeper, primal instinct screamed at me to stay absolutely still, to pretend I wasn't there. The tapping stopped. The groaning ceased. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sounds. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, rigid with fear, barely daring to breathe. The cabin, which had always been a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile barrier against an unknown horror. I imagined pale eyes peering through the glass, a gaunt face pressed against the rough wood. When the first faint light of dawn finally began to filter through the windows, chasing away the oppressive darkness, I scrambled out of bed. My body ached from tension, my eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. I crept to the back door, the rifle still in my hands, and cautiously peered out. The woods looked innocent again, bathed in the soft morning light. The leaves were still. The air was still. But then my eyes caught something on the ground directly beneath the small window above my bed. A single dark footprint. It was far too large to be human, and the shape was subtly wrong, too long, too narrow, with an odd, splayed toe. It was pressed deep into the damp earth, as if something incredibly heavy had stood there for a long time. I backed away, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I didn't wait around. I packed my bags in a frantic haze, threw them into my truck, and drove away without looking back. I abandoned the cabin, leaving the rifle behind, unable to bear the thought of staying another minute. I've never been back to the cabin, and I've never gone camping in the woods since. The memory of that rhythmic tapping, the low groan outside my window, and the chilling imprint of that strange footprint in the mud has haunted me for years. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I swear I can still hear a faint tap, 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 coming from somewhere just beyond my sight, a chilling reminder of whatever lurks in the silent depths of the November woods. My daily routine was practically etched in stone. Every morning, no matter the weather, I'd take my golden retriever, Buster, for a walk in the local park. It was a small, well-maintained park with a playground, a walking path, and a scattering of old oak trees. Early November mornings were usually crisp and quiet, just me, Buster, and the occasional dedicated jogger. The playground, with its swings, slides, and monkey bars, was always empty at that hour, covered in a thin layer of dew, sparkling faintly in the nascent sunlight. It was a peaceful start to my day before the hustle of my job as a freelance graphic designer began. I cherished those quiet moments, the feeling of fresh air filling my lungs, the comfortable rhythm of my footsteps. The first unusual incident occurred one brisk Tuesday morning. Buster was sniffing around a particularly interesting patch of grass near the playground fence when I saw it. A faint, dark shape. It was a shadow, long and thin, stretching out from behind the swing set. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the park, so I didn't think much of it. Just the light playing tricks, I mused. But then, as I watched, the shadow seemed to shift, to subtly lengthen and then contract, even though nothing visible was moving behind the swings. It was almost as if it was swaying. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. When I looked again, it was gone. Just the empty playground, bathed in the soft, orange glow of the rising sun. I shook my head, attributing it to a trick of the light, perhaps a distant branch swaying in the wind. Buster, oblivious, continued his diligent sniffing. A few mornings later, the shadow reappeared, more distinct this time and far more unsettling. I was sitting on a park bench while Buster explored, scrolling through emails on my phone. When I looked up, there it was again. A tall, impossibly thin shadow standing upright behind the slide. This time there was no mistaking it. It was clearly defined, a stark silhouette against the slightly brighter background of the sky. But again, there was nothing behind the slide that could cast such a shadow. No person, no tree, no object. The slide itself was a bright yellow plastic, completely uncovered. My heart gave a little flutter. I stared at it, a cold prickle running down my spine. The shadow remained perfectly still for a few seconds. Then, slowly, deliberately, it seemed to tilt as if bowing its head before dissolving into nothingness. My breath caught in my throat. I stood up, my gaze fixed on the spot where it had been. And I imagined it. The morning air felt suddenly colder, and the park, usually so comforting, now seemed to hold a sinister stillness. Buster chose that moment to let out a short, nervous whine, his tail drooping, and he pulled on his leash, urging me away from the playground. The appearances of the shadow became a regular, terrifying fixture of my morning walks. It always appeared in the playground, always in my peripheral vision, and always when the sun was low. It never seemed to move when I looked directly at it, but would vanish, only to reappear a moment later in a slightly different spot, always just out of reach of direct observation. It started to mess with my head. I'd find myself glancing nervously at the playground as I approached, my heart pounding in anticipation. I tried to dismiss it as sleep deprivation or my imagination playing tricks, but the shadow was too consistent, too distinct. One morning as I walked past the empty swing set, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible creak, as if a swing was gently swaying, even though the air was completely still. I whipped my head around. The swings were motionless, hanging perfectly straight. But just beyond them, lurking in the faint mist that clung to the ground, was the tall, thin shadow. This time, it seemed to be facing directly towards me, its form subtly elongated, almost reaching out. A wave of pure, unadulterated dread washed over me. It felt like it was watching me, waiting. The climax of my terror arrived on a particularly foggy November morning. The park was shrouded in a thick, swirling mist that reduced visibility to only a few feet. It was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of distant traffic muffled to nothing. As Buster and I walked along the path, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The air was heavy and the silence was oppressive. We reached the playground and through the swirling fog I saw it, the shadow. This time it wasn't a distant silhouette. It was right there, standing at the base of the slide, incredibly tall and thin, its form almost solid within the mist. It seemed to be observing the empty swings, its head slightly tilted, almost as if contemplating them. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a trick of light. This was something. And it was no longer just a shadow. Its edges seemed to ripple, almost like fabric, and I could faintly discern a darkness within the darkness. A deeper, more profound void that seemed to absorb the light around it. Buster let out a terrified yelp, digging his heels in, pulling frantically on his leash, his fur bristling, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was staring directly at the shadow, seeing what I was seeing. And then, as if sensing our fear, the shadow slowly, deliberately turned its head. It didn't have eyes or a face, but I felt its gaze, a chilling, malevolent presence that pierced through the fog and into my very soul. It began to move, a slow, gliding motion coming towards us, its impossibly long form rippling in the mist. I didn't think. I reacted. I yanked hard on Buster's leash and turned, scrambling, almost tripping as I ran as fast as I could, away from the playground, away from the park, away from that terrifying, silent figure. Buster, usually a reluctant runner, was a blur beside me, his fear mirroring my own. We didn't stop until we reached my front door, both of us panting, trembling, and soaked in cold sweat. I locked the door, pulled all the blinds, and spent the rest of the day huddled inside, unable to shake the image of that gliding shadow, its form emerging from the mist, its silent gaze fixed on us. I never walked Buster in that park again. I found a new route, miles away, a busy street with plenty of people and open spaces. Even now, years later, I avoid playgrounds, especially at dawn and particularly in November. The memory of that tall, thin shadow rippling in the mist, and the way it seemed to watch me, has permanently stained my perception of the world. I still sometimes feel a cold prickle on the back of my neck, and I glance nervously at long shadows, always half expecting to see that impossibly thin figure emerge, silently waiting.